Today's video is a little bit different, but it's a conversation I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time because it actually began with me simply watching an Elvis Presley movie. I recently watched Blue Hawaii for my Elvis Presley film series, and while I obviously went into it watching it for Elvis, there was another performer that stood out to me, and her name was Jenny Maxwell. She plays Ellie Corbett, and she was so good at making this character absolutely infuriating that I immediately wanted to know more about who this actress was. So I looked her up. And what I found was an extraordinary Hollywood story, an unsolved murder case that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. Jenny was murdered in 1981 at the age of 39 in what her family was told for years was a botched robbery attempt, but that never really sat right with the family. So my guest today is Buddy Moorehouse. He's the author of Murder of an Elvis Girl, Solving the Jenny Maxwell Case. Buddy is also Jenny's cousin, and decades after her death, his investigation eventually led him to the original homicide detectives and an extraordinary discovery about what investigators believed really happened to Jenny. Thank you so much for joining me today, Buddy. So I wanted to, obviously, before we get into everything about Jenny and her Hollywood career and Elvis and everything that happened to her, I first of all want to kind of understand the connection between you and Jenny.
Yeah, so Jenny was my mother's first cousin. My grandfather, Elling, and Jenny's father, Johnny, were brothers who immigrated from Norway in the early 1900s. So I am Jenny's first cousin once removed. Right. Yeah, she and my mom were first cousins and very close when they were children.
So they were close. And so did you ever get to meet her, or by that stage
No. I never met Jenny. The only one I did meet her son Brian, talked to him, got to know him pretty well. But I never got to meet Jenny or know Jenny, or her parents. So Brian is the only one on that side of the family that I got to meet.
Right. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. I mean, having a cousin that's so done some really incredible things. So I want to go right back to the beginning of her story, because when I was reading your book, I'm an actor myself, and we all kind of have that kind of moment where we discover our passion for acting. And for Jenny, she had a really interesting, she found acting in an interesting way, right?
Yeah. So Jenny was an only child. And she, her parents were both from Norway. They didn't know each other in Norway. They met over in the United States when they both came here. Yeah, so they were from two different towns in Norway, but they kind of got involved in the same Norwegian community in New York City when they were both over here. So Jenny was their only child. She was totally spoiled when she was a little kid. She was the apple of her daddy's eye, and her mother totally spoiled her as well. And my mother, Vera, it was 6 years older than Jenny, and my mother lived in Chicago, Illinois, and Jenny lived in Brooklyn, New York. And my mother used to every year take the train during the summer from Chicago, where she lived, to New York City, and she would babysit Jenny. And my mom was also totally into theater and drama and all that. So when she would go and visit Jenny, they would do, my mom was like 11 and 12, and Jenny was 6, 7 years old. They would just do plays. They would write their own plays and perform them for the neighborhood kids. And Jenny idolized my mom, and my mom just adored Jenny. So she realized pretty early on that's what she wanted to do. And it was, in talking to people in the family, they said it was really when she first saw her first Audrey Hepburn movie that the light went on in her mind that this is what I want to do. Audrey Hepburn was her favorite actress by far. I idolized her. So Jenny started taking theater classes and dance classes and singing classes in New York City, and that's really where it all started for her and how she got discovered.
Yeah, and she was discovered by someone quite legendary. If you want to be discovered, you're going to be discovered by this man. Who was she discovered by?
Vincente Minnelli, who was a film director, Judy Garland's first husband, Liza Minnelli's father.
Liza's dad.
Yes, exactly. Vincente Minnelli had a really good friend who ran an acting school. Her name was Gooby Mann. ran an acting school in New York City, and he was just in there visiting Gooby, and was at the school when one of her classes was going on, and literally he saw Jenny up on stage. She had just a striking blonde, beautiful girl. She had the it, she had this thing about her, and when Vincente Minnelli saw her up there, he said, I need her to come and audition for this movie that I'm doing. I'm doing this film called Some Came Running with Frank Sinatra, and I need somebody to play Frank Sinatra's niece in the movie, and I think Jenny would be absolutely perfect. So literally, it's like you hear about, getting discovered at the soda shop. That's really, Jenny got discovered by Vincente Minnelli at her theater school. Flew her out to L.A., her and her mom out to L.A., and she didn't get the role. Only because after he did screen tests with Frank Sinatra, they realized they were looking for somebody who was a brunette instead of a blonde, that it would look better that way. But immediately, she got an agent out there right away, and immediately this person said, you've got it. Don't worry about not getting this role. You've got it, and we're going to get you other work. And then immediately she got a couple of parts in sitcoms, and her career kind of took off from there. And she was only, 16, 17 years old.
I was going to say, she's like a baby when this is happening. That's an unbelievable thing to happen at that age, not only to audition with Frank Sinatra, but to move to the other side of the country and begin working in Hollywood. And I believe that her parents stayed behind in New York. Is that right?
Yes. My uncle Johnny, he built skyscrapers in New York City. That was his job. That was one of the reasons he wanted to come over to America, is that he wanted to do that. So he had no desire at all to leave New York City. When he heard that Jenny wanted to become an actress, he thought that she was going to be an actress on Broadway, and she was going to stay in New York City, and that she wouldn't have to move. But that's not how things worked out. Her mom, Annie, is really the one who pushed her into the TV and film career. So when Jenny moved to Hollywood, Annie moved out there with her for several months and lived with her while her career got going. But Johnny was adamant that he did not want to, to move to Hollywood as well. So he never moved out there. And then eventually Annie came back to New York City, and Jenny was on her own, and her career took off, but she made a lot of bad decisions.
I was going to say, I guess in hindsight, I guess her parents wished, or at least her mother wished, she'd stayed out in Los Angeles with her. To be that young out there by yourself is, even now, a toxic situation.
And to have that kind of success and everything right away, and having people, and getting parts in TV shows and then movies, and people telling her how beautiful she was, and getting all this attention from casting agents and directors. And for a 17-year-old girl to be having all that and to not have your parents there, it wasn't a good recipe, and it certainly wasn't a good recipe for Jenny.
No, and I guess hindsight's a beautiful thing, but yeah. So she's out in Hollywood. Success is happening very, very fast. She's getting a lot of television work. She becomes a Deb star of 1960. I hadn't heard of Deb stars until I read your book. Can you explain to me what a Deb star is and what that meant for her?
Right. That was a huge thing that was in the late 1950s and early 1960s in Hollywood. Deb was short for debutante, and it was basically a coming out party for that year's crop of new Hollywood starlets.
Right.
So every year it was the Hollywood Makeup Artists Association, whatever their official name was, but they were the ones that every year would pick 10 or 12 promising young actresses, and they were called the Deb Stars. The Deb Stars in 1960, the Deb Stars in 1961, whatever it happened to be. And there would be a big TV special where they would introduce them. It was hosted by Bob Hope. The year that Jenny was a Deb Star, Joan Crawford was the co-host of it. It was a huge thing. Bob Hope was the biggest thing on TV back then.
Yeah.
So every year they would have this big special where they would introduce the Deb Stars. And Jenny had done, she was a Deb Star in 1960. The one that she filmed was filmed in October of 1960. She was only 18 years old, and she had already gotten married and become a mom at that point.
That's a lot for an 18-year-old. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah, and she wasn't ready for that. but yeah, that really kind of altered her to a whole new stratosphere, and it was after that she got the part in Blue Hawaii.
Yeah.
But it was also along that time that they came up with this lie that I don't know whether it was her agent or whether it was who came up with this, but they came up with this lie that Jenny was Marilyn Monroe's cousin. And if you go back and look at there's actually recordings you can see online of the Deb Stars broadcast from that year. Bob Hope introduces her as Marilyn Monroe's second cousin. And she was not Marilyn Monroe's cousin. She was not related to Marilyn Monroe at all. But somebody came up with this idea that it would make her more bankable and exotic if she was related to Marilyn Monroe. The other thing they did is they lied and said that she was born in Norway and grew up in Norway. And she was born in Brooklyn, New York, and grew up there. But they thought that made her seem like this exotic Scandinavian beauty. So when she was on the Deb Star show in 1960, they introduced her as Marilyn Monroe's second cousin, a Norwegian-born beauty.
And she was neither.
No, exactly. She was neither one. So her whole career on that, at least that part of it, was built on a lie.
I think that's so common in Hollywood even today. Like, it's just like,
yeah.
How can we make you the most interesting version of yourself? Let's try and find something and exemplify it.
And there was no way back then to check it.
Yeah, well, exactly right. There was no Wikipedia and social media back then to go have a look. You mentioned that she's married at 18 and a mother. So she married Paul Rapp, I believe, and she met him on set. He was an assistant director. She met him on set. How did she meet him? How did their relationship come about? How was their relationship?
Yeah, Jenny married this guy named Paul Rapp, who was an assistant director. She met him on one of the TV shows that she was doing. He was 6 years older than Jenny was. She started dating him. She doesn't have any parents out there at all.
Yeah.
She had told her parents that she was in this relationship, that she had met this man, that they were kind of getting serious, and they were just totally opposed to her having any kind of a serious relationship when she was that young and her career was going on. So they did not have the blessing of their parents, and they went to Arizona, to this town that did quickie weddings, and they eloped there and then came back to California. Jenny was in the middle of shooting a movie called Blue Denim at that point, and she came back and she was married and kind of announced it in the gossip columns to the world. And then soon after that, she got pregnant. She got married in 1959, and soon after that, she got pregnant. And then in 1960, she gave birth in June 1960 to her son, Brian. So 18 years old, she was already an established Hollywood star, married, and a mom.
That it boggles your mind how... obviously, she was forced to grow up way too quickly that anyone can even... that one human can comprehend. I mean, to do all that by 18. But even when I was reading your book, just like whenever I'd read your book, I'd look at the age and think, God, every stage of her life, my God, she's so young. She's so young. She's so young. And then ultimately, she dies so young. But to have so much happen to her is just unbelievable. So she's married. She's a mother. She's one of the biggest up-and-coming stars in Hollywood. And Blue Hawaii with Elvis, the biggest megastar of all time, is casting. How did Blue Hawaii and her role in Blue Hawaii come about?
So she had in 1960, after she had Brian, her career was still going like gangbusters. She'd lost all her baby weight, and she was kind of at the age where she was able to play. She could still play teenagers. She looked young enough. She wasn't quite old enough to be able to play a mom character, but she could still play an older teenager, or maybe a young 20s person. So there was this movie being coming out called Blue Hawaii. It was going to be it was kind of a coming out party for Hawaii itself. So Hawaii became a state, became a U.S. state just the year before that in 1959, and it was really an unknown place over here. Nobody ever went to Hawaii, really. It was still kind of this exotic place that you heard about, but nobody really went there. So Hawaii was looking for kind of a vehicle that they could use to promote itself or promote themselves as a tourist destination. So they hooked up with the I can't remember if it was Paramount or who it was who did Blue Hawaii, and they rolled out the red carpet for them, and they said, we want you to make this big movie out here and have Elvis Presley be in it, and it's really going to be a showcase for Hawaii. So she had done a few things that kind of got her notice, but it was really it was an episode of The Twilight Zone that she did. For fans of The Twilight Zone, it was one of the more iconic episodes. It was one called Long Distance Call, where there was an actor named Billy Mooney who was he became famous later for being in Lost in Space, the TV series Lost in Space.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had done another really famous episode of The Twilight Zone, but he played a little boy whose grandmother dies, and then he starts getting phone calls on his toy phone, and the phone call is from his grandmother in the next world. And Jenny played the babysitter who, the parents go away and then they come home and they realize that he's on the phone talking to grandma on his toy phone. So it was a very, very famous, well-known, iconic episode, and she was great in this. But Norman Torog, who was the guy who directed Blue Hawaii, had seen that specifically and said, she would be perfect for this role that we have in Blue Hawaii of this bratty girl named Ellie, who is one of these teenagers who goes on this trip to Hawaii. So she read for the part, she nailed it, and then she flew out to Hawaii in March of 1961 to make Blue Hawaii. And Paul, her husband, and Brian, her son, came with her.
Did she read with Elvis? Did she have a screen test with him? Because their chemistry was so good.
Yeah, she read with Elvis, and he loved her. They had great chemistry. And if you've ever seen Blue Hawaii, and I know you said you watched the movie, if you've seen Blue Hawaii, you see that a lot of the movie depends on the chemistry between them, because she's really just a total brat in the movie. Totally frustrates Elvis. There's one really famous scene in there where he ends up pulling her out of the water and spanking her. Something you've never seen in a movie today.
No,
that was one of the more famous scenes in that movie. But yeah, the chemistry that they had was just absolutely perfect.
I remember seeing that scene. I had no idea it was coming up, and that scene came on, and I was so shocked and uncomfortable. I'm like, whoa!
Did I just see that? Yeah.
So it definitely wouldn't happen today. But I mentioned to you earlier, she's so good in this role. She holds it. She is in her own league against Elvis, the biggest human ever. So the fact that she can hold her own in scenes against Elvis shows her potential. But she was so bloody annoying, to sound very Australian, in this role, that I was so frustrated watching her that's kind of what led me down this rabbit hole of finding out who she was. And I think, the fact that she stood out so much to me against Elvis Presley shows just what a talented actress she was, the star power that she had, and of course the beauty was obviously there. And yes, you write in the book as well that they filmed obviously in Hawaii, so it was a bit of a party going on. But she, at this time, her husband was there, her baby was there, she was a mother. But apparently that Elvis had kissed her at a party.
Tried to, yeah. He leaned in for a real awkward kiss at one point during. So there were big parties, like you said, that took place every night during filming. They're filming at this huge resort in Hawaii, so they're not on a soundstage or anything like that. They're at a Hawaiian resort.
They're having fun.
It's March, it's beautiful weather. They're having a great time. Paul came out there specifically because he wanted to keep an eye on Jenny. He wanted to make sure nothing was going to happen. He knew Elvis's reputation and didn't want anything to happen, so he insisted on coming out there and bringing Brian with them. So she would, whenever possible, she would try to sneak away to go to these parties that they had every night while Paul was back at the hotel room babysitting Brian. And one night apparently Elvis made a pretty awkward pass at Jenny. It didn't go very well. She said, "I'm married." Nothing happened.
Oh, she's strong.
Nothing happened beyond that. But whoever said no to Elvis Presley?
I know. Good on her. And also, so this is at the resort, and apparently Brian took his first steps in front of Elvis Presley. Brian told you this.
And Brian told me this story too. Yeah, he took his first steps. He was probably like 9 months old, 10 months old at the time, but it was from the story that Brian told that he had always heard from his mom and dad, or from his mom, was that they were having a wrap party for Blue Hawaii, and everybody was around there, and they were having this big bonfire there, and Brian, that's where he took his first steps, and a lot of people in the cast and crew had gotten to kind of know him a little bit because they were out there for a couple months filming. And yeah, he actually took his first steps in front of Elvis Presley and everyone else. So it's not an uncool thing to have happen. Yeah,
that's the most iconic thing you could have. That's a story to tell at parties.
I took my first steps in front of Elvis Presley.
Elvis. That's amazing. So Blue Hawaii comes out, and obviously Jenny, we think that Jenny's poised for like massive success. She's going to be a Marilyn Monroe star, basically. She's stunning. She can hold her own. She's a good actress. Here we go. But it's around this time that she's starting to party and drink that starts to kind of impact her life a little bit.
Right. She and Paul had a terrible marriage from the beginning. Yeah. They were way too young to get married to begin with. Especially, Jenny was way too young to get married. Had no business being a wife or a mother at that time. She had all this wildness still left in her. So when they came back from Hawaii in 1960, her career continued to take off. She had and I looked this up when I was researching the book too. Blue Hawaii came out right around Thanksgiving in November. It's an American holiday in late November of 1960. And that same week that Blue Hawaii came out, she was in an episode of a TV show called Dr. Kildare, where she played this flirtatious nurse. And that was like the number one TV show in America at that time. So in 1 week, she was in the number one movie in the country and the number one TV show in the country. So literally she, was the hottest star in Hollywood in November of 1960. So her career was doing great. Her marriage and being a mother was doing terribly. And she started partying a lot more after that, started being real irresponsible with a lot of the obligations that she had for auditions and things like that. And, starting around 1962, 63 or so, really her career started to take a hit.
So we're hitting the early 1960s. Her and Paul at some point separate.
Right. She and I can't remember. I know it's in the book. I can't remember the exact year, but their marriage was terrible. They were fighting all the time, arguing all the time. Finally, they decided they're just going to get a divorce. And at this point, Jenny was being as irresponsible as you could possibly be. By the mid-1960s, her career started to take a hit too. After she had done Take Her, She's Mine, she had a few other fairly big roles especially in some sitcoms and some dramas on TV, but nothing that you would have expected after Blue Hawaii. And then she and Paul split up and ended up getting a divorce, and it got to the point where Paul decided that he was actually going to go for custody of Brian, which was unheard of at the time that a father would ever get custody of a child, and he ended up gaining custody of Brian, and that was just kind of emblematic of the life that she was living at that time.
So she loses her son, she's divorced, her career's failing, so she's obviously starting to think, I've got to find a way to support myself. And I think, correct me if you're wrong, I think you wrote in the book she kind of thought maybe it's time to find a wealthy husband. And she stumbles upon a man by the name of Irvin Tip Ryder. Can you explain to me who this man was?
Right. So Jenny's life started to spiral out of control right around 67, 68 or so, to the point where she had lost custody of Brian. She got to see him maybe once every week or so, or a couple times a month. Had almost no contact with him. Her life was just going terribly. And she realized in 1968 that she needed to give up acting. She needed to give up her Hollywood career, give up that lifestyle, and to hopefully try to win back at least partial custody of Brian, to be able to see him. So the last thing she ever did was a TV series that she did called The Wild Wild West in 1968. She did a really small part in that, and that was it. So her entire Hollywood career only lasted 10 years. From 1958 to 1968. She was only 26 years old when her Hollywood career ended. So her career went from age 16 to age 26. So 26, her Hollywood career's over. She'd been, married and divorced, had a child, lost custody of the child. Her life was at rock bottom there, and she realized I need to do something to try to get it back on track. So 68, she decided she was going to quit Hollywood and realized she needed to do something to support herself with. She had this really interesting side business where she was making ceramic artwork.
Oh.
And yeah, very, very random, but apparently she was very successful at it. So she was selling those things on the side. I don't know how it worked back then, but she had this artistic side, and she was able to make a little bit of money that way. But she realized she needed to do one of two things. She either needed to get another job or she needed to find a rich husband.
Yeah.
And she decided she was going to find a rich husband. So so she met this lawyer named Tip Rader, who was 20 years older than her. He had already burned through 3 marriages himself at that point. He was this big, tall, loud. He was a former cop, former police officer, just abrasive attorney who mostly did divorce cases, but he also did some criminal work. And he was the type of person that came in the room and you immediately, knew who he was, and you immediately disliked him. Everybody who ever knew Tip did not like him. But he was infatuated with the Hollywood lifestyle, and he desperately wanted to have a Hollywood girlfriend or Hollywood wife. So he and Jenny started dating right around 1968, 69, and they ended up getting married in 1970. And as bad as her marriage was with Paul Rapp, her marriage with Tip Rader was even worse.
Do you think, in your research and talking to people that knew them, do you think that she ever loved him, or do you think it was purely just a security thing for her?
No.
Yeah.
I've talked to Brian about this. I talked to some other family members about this, and no, it was entirely. I don't think she could even stand him. I think it was entirely security. He was a well-to-do Beverly Hills Hollywood lawyer. They lived in a really nice house in Beverly Hills there. So I think that she just looked at that as a way to be able to support herself while she could get the rest of her life back on track. And the one really good thing that happened along about this then was she was able to actually become a good mother to Brian. She was able to win back. She won back the trust of her parents to begin with, because they had kind of realized that she wasn't going to be a good mother to Brian. They were supportive of Paul having custody of Brian. So she was able to win back the trust of her parents, reestablish a relationship with them, and then get have a good relationship with Brian at that time. So she won back some more custody of him. She was able to see him a lot more. So by the time that Brian was like 13, 14, 15 years old, they were more like good friends than they were mother and son. They would drink together and smoke marijuana together and do all this stuff. But in her own way, Jenny was at that point at least the best mother that she could be. And Brian just absolutely adored her. But at that point also there were members of our family that had kind of reconnected with Jenny. And so we have a lot of really great stories about it. Her mother Annie died in 1970, the same year that the same year that Jenny and Tip got married. But Johnny was still around, and Johnny would go out he spent a lot of time out in California at that time, visiting with Jenny and Brian. He just adored Brian. So Jenny kind of put her family life back together, even though her marriage was absolutely terrible.
So it seems like she was kind of getting the most important aspects of her life back together. So in the 70s, so from 1970 when she marries this man to 81, what does her life look like? Is it just, focusing on family? She's not working?
Exactly, entirely. It was entirely focusing on family. She had a lot of parties at their house. She still had a lot of her Hollywood friends that she hung out with a lot. She had a lot of friends outside of Hollywood as well. But she would have parties all the time. Tip hardly ever came to any of those parties, even at their house. He didn't want anything to do with any of that. He loved going out in public with Jenny and being able to have arm candy and show her off to his friends at these bars that they would go to. But no, they could like barely stand each other. And then one of the things that also came out later is at this point they were both cheating on each other all the time.
Yeah.
Tip's relationships were more long term. Like he would have a girlfriend for a year or two on the side, and Jenny's were usually just one night stands that she would do to make Tip jealous. But yeah, so her life was, she was a wonderful mother to Brian, saw him a lot, through his teenage years, and then when, by 1980 he had turned 20 at that point. So spending a lot of time with Brian, a lot of time at their house and having parties and doing things there, and then barely tolerating Tip.
I mean, I guess that's a blessing considering what happens to her, that she has a relationship with her family, especially her son and her father, that she's able to mend those bridges. So we're in 1981 now, and her and Tip are separated. Is she heading for divorce? Is that the plan?
Right. She'd wanted to divorce Tip for a long time, starting in like the mid 70s. She just couldn't stand it. She said it's not worth it. Even with him, being able to support me, it's just not worth it being married. So she went to a divorce lawyer, and was getting advice from friends too. She went to a divorce lawyer who told her that in California, the way the law worked was that you had to be married for at least 10 years to be entitled to half of what your spouse had. So if she divorced Tip at 9 years, she'd get nothing. She would only get, whatever she came into the relationship with, which was nothing. But if she stuck it out to 10 years, then she would be entitled to half of what Tip had. So she got this advice and decided she was just going to bite the bullet and stick it out to 10 years. So she made it to 1980 to 10 years, and then into early 1981. And she said, I can't take it anymore. We need to get divorced. We need to split up. So they separated. They weren't divorced, but they separated. She moved out, got a condo of her own in Beverly Hills, and Tip was still living at their house, and it was also in Beverly Hills at that time.
Right, so they're separated. She's divorcing him. It's now June 10th, 1981. She has an appointment at the hospital, and Tip says he's going to pick her up, which to me, when I read that, is a red flag as it is, because this man's awful. Don't let him pick you up from the hospital. Get your friend to take you home. He picks her up. What happens after he picks her up from the hospital?
Yeah, Jenny had gone into it was a really famous hospital in Los Angeles called Cedars-Sinai. She had gone in there for a real minor procedure that she was going to have to end up spending the night for, and on June 9th. And on June 10th, she was going to be getting out of the hospital. So Tip called her and, knew she was going in for this. And he said, listen, I'll pick you up at the hospital. I'll get you, I'll bring you back. We'll maybe have lunch. I'll bring you back to your apartment. We'll be all set. She had told a friend of hers, a woman I actually talked to, who told me this story. She told her friend who was planning on picking her up, she said, you don't need to come get me. Tip's going to come pick me up. And her friend said, no, that's a terrible idea. Do not, Jenny, do not do this. And Jenny said, no, he's actually being really nice to me now. I think maybe he wants to, start over again, and he's been really, really nice to me lately. I think it's okay. So her friend desperately tried to talk Jenny out of letting Tip pick her up at the hospital, but she eventually said, no, I'm going to have him pick me up. Everything will be fine. So yeah, Tip picked her up at the hospital, and that's when everything went bad.
So he picks her up. They head back to her apartment, and at the apartment is where they're, I guess, set upon, the pair of them, by a gunman, when it's reported as a botched robbery, right?
Right. They Tip picked her up. They went and got lunch, and then they went back to her apartment in Beverly Hills, and they were accosted by somebody outside the apartment, somebody with a gun. Who ended up shooting both of them. He shot Jenny twice in the head. She died instantly. He shot Tip once in the stomach. And then, at that point, the police were called, and a newspaper reporter came to the scene. There was one story that was in the newspaper at that time that said that it was a botched robbery. And what ended up happening, and this is really critical, obviously, to the story, is that Jenny died immediately. Tip ended up dying about 3.5 hours later after bleeding out. He'd only been shot in the stomach, but it got a bunch of major organs, and he ended up being taken to the hospital, and he bled out, and he died 3.5 hours later. And one of the really interesting things that when it was reported in the newspaper at the time, and this is in the book, when it was reported in the newspaper at the time, the headline in there and the story in there just identified them as, well-known attorney and his wife were killed. It didn't say anything in there about that. Literally 20 years earlier, in 1961, she was literally the most famous actress in the business, or the hottest actress in the business at that time. So at that point, she had been relegated to just being Tip Rader's wife in there. It didn't even say, just listed wife in the headline, even though she was far more famous than Tip was. So the newspaper reporters totally missed out on that. But yeah,
I wonder if the journalists didn't know, or whether he was just being... What was the... Do your research, mate.
No, they didn't. This is, of course, before the internet, so they couldn't look up and see that Jennifer Rader was actually Jenny Maxwell, the famous film actress. That came out a little bit later. Some people finally started to put it together, going, oh, yeah, she was actually, an actress. But the initial stories all just said that it was this well-known flamboyant attorney and his wife were killed. So we found out about it on the family side of it. I was a senior in college at that time. I was going to the University of Michigan, and I remember this so well. So well. So we had our family was the Norwegian side of our family was pretty close, and we had this one cousin over in Norway. Her name was Venki, who was kind of like the family gossip and knew everything that was going on with everything. So if we ever want to know what was happening with Jenny or what was happening with any of the cousins in Norway, my mom would call Venki over in Norway, and she would give her the rundown. So Venki called my mom, who was living in Illinois at the time. She called my mom, and she said, oh my gosh, have you heard what happened? Jenny and her husband got murdered. And my mom was just started sobbing at that point. She said, what happened? She said, I don't know. We got a call from Johnny, Jenny's dad, who had talked to Harold, who was one of the other brothers who lived in the United States, just said that Jenny and her husband had gotten, murdered. And we didn't know any details at all about that. So my mom called me and my sister, and she was just in tears, saying, oh my gosh, Jenny got killed. We don't know what happened. So I said, again, this is long before the internet. I said, let me see if I can find out what happened. I was a student reporter at the college newspaper at the time, so I knew a little bit about how newspapers operated. So I said, I wonder if the Los Angeles newspaper did a story on it. So I called out there to the Los Angeles Times. I told them who I was, and I just said, can you tell me if there was any story about, this woman and her husband, a lawyer, getting killed? So a really nice person on the other end of the phone said, let me look into it, and I'll call you back. So looked up, found the story. She read the story to me over the phone, that it was a botched robbery. And literally from that time for the next 40 years, that's what our family thought, and that's what the world thought, that this was a botched robbery. We thought none of us had ever met Tip. Johnny, of course, had met him, and none of us had ever met Tip. We didn't know anything about him at all. We heard that he was involved with the mafia, with the mob. So the big rumor in our family was that this was a mob hit gone wrong. Yeah. That Tip had gotten involved in the mob, and they were trying to, rub him out, and Jenny ended up getting into the way. So we thought that was always kind of the big speculation in our mind. But this was something that really... we would talk about it every so often, and certainly every time Blue Hawaii came on TV, we would watch it. But it was one of those things that was always weighing heavy on my mom's heart, that she never knew really what happened. And her big fear was always that Jenny had done something wrong, that Jenny had gotten mixed up with drugs or something, or this was something that she had done that had caused this. And so it was one of those things that was always sort of just nagging on her heart, that not knowing whatever happened to her cousin, or what was the real story behind the murder.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? So obviously it's something that's a big part of your family life and family law. And so what made you sit down and go, I'm going to try and figure this out? Where are we at now? What year are we at? Where are you at? And how did you even begin where do you even begin?
Yeah, so in in early 2019, my mom's health started to really take a bad turn. She was not doing well. She was 84 years old at that time. Her health was really starting to get bad. You know, we knew she didn't have too much longer. So I just like got it into my head one day that I would love to be able to find out whatever happened to Jenny so that my mom would at least be able to have some comfort in her heart in knowing what happened to her cousin. Because again, this is one of those things that just, we didn't talk about a lot, but I knew it would always weigh on my mom's heart. So yeah. I got it in my head. I wanted to find out what happened. So, you know, I did all the basic stuff and looked up online. Just, you know, there was nothing there. Tons of Elvis fan websites of people talking about, you know, this was a tragedy in the Elvis universe, and there were a few other murders of people that were involved with Elvis, or tragic deaths of people that were involved with Elvis, you know, Natalie Wood and a few other people. But we didn't have any, you know, no explanation. So what I did is I called out to the Beverly Hills Police Department. I found the precinct that was originally reported in the story. Called out there and asked for the detective bureau. Got a hold of this young guy who was in his mid-30s. He wasn't even alive when this happened, but I, you know, told him who I was, and I said, I'm trying to find out if anything ever happened. You know, was there any resolution to the case? I was hoping maybe they would reopen it. You know, if this had been sitting in a file somewhere, that they would reopen it and want to look at it again. So the guy was really helpful and really intrigued by the story. He said, we're in the process now of digitizing a lot of our files, but let me see what I can find out. So he looked into it, called me back a day later, and he said, I found the paper file, the actual file of the case, but all it is just the report from that day, what happened. It's just the initial report. It didn't have any information.
Oh my God.
But what it did have is it had a little sticker on there that had the names of the two detectives it was assigned to. And it just said Thies and Roger were the two names of these people. So then I go, okay, great. So then I go and look up who were Thies and Rogers, or either one of them still around. Well, Rogers was a guy named Jerry Rogers, who I was able to find out a detective who had passed away. But Mike Thies, who was the other detective, the lead detective on the case, was still around. So just some, you know, hunting around and pecking and finding, looking for emails or whatever. I got an email address for Mike Thies' wife. I emailed her and I said, told him who I was, and I just said, if this is your husband, I would love to talk to him about this case. A day later, I get an email back from him saying, hey, this is Mike Thies. I did investigate the case. I'd love to talk to you about this. So this is February of 2019, I'm sorry. So I get on the phone with Mike Thies, and, you know, he says, wow, I can't believe that, you know, you tracked me down or found this. I said, yeah, I'm just wondering, was it ever resolved? Was there anything? He said, yeah, we actually solved that like within the first 10 days after it happened. And I said, why wasn't it ever, you know, put out there? He said, nobody ever asked. We didn't view this as our job to call the newspaper and say, hey, this is what happened. He said, but yeah, we basically solved the case in the first 10 days. So he, and you know, we can get into that in a second here, but he told me exactly what happened, and I was able to call my mom and my sister, got them both on the phone, and I said, you're not going to believe this. I talked to the detective. I found out what happened. So I was able to tell my mother what happened to Jenny, and there was nothing that she had done, aside from marrying a horrible person, nothing that she had done wrong. So, you know, my mom passed away a couple weeks after that, but she was able, at least in her heart, to know, to have closure for that part of it. So I felt really, really good.
Yeah, what a wonderful thing to have given her that. Oh my
yeah.
God. I've been so like wrapped in Jenny Maxwell's world. I'm so in it now.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing to have done for your mum. How special, and yeah, that's really lovely. And I'm so glad that she passed away knowing that how her beloved cousin passed, but it wasn't her fault.
Right. So now we can get into what actually happened.
So what happened? What happened?
Mike told me the whole story, and then I flew out there to L.A. I live in Michigan, and then I flew out to Los Angeles in May of 2019 and met with Mike a block from the murder scene. We met at a coffee shop there, and at that point he had gotten from a friend of his who still worked at the police department. Mike was retired at that point. But he had gotten the actual report that he filed back in 1981. He got a copy of that, and he had it on his iPad, and he showed me what was in there. So the truth of what happened is one of the wildest true crime, type of stories. But basically what happened is that Tip knew exactly what was going on, that Jenny was trying to get to the 10-year point, and that she was going to divorce him and take half of his money. And he did not want that to happen. So what Tip did is he started looking for a hitman, somebody that would do exactly what happened, somebody that would kill Jenny, would wound him slightly to make it look like a botched robbery, that he would then have plausible deniability as to what happened. He would have, he would have a bullet wound he would need to recover from, but he was willing to go through that if he would not have to give up half of his money to his ex-wife. So Mike said what happened is we were able to track down. We started going to people that Tip knew. We a lot of it centered around this restaurant, the steakhouse that Tip went to all the time, called Red Tracton Steakhouse. Red Tracton was a former boxer who owned this really well-known steakhouse in Los Angeles that all the mob people hung out at. This was Red Tracton himself was never involved in anything shady, but literally everybody else in there was into something. So if you wanted to see a bad guy, you would go to Red Tracton Steakhouse and they would be there. So Tip hung out there all the time. So one of the first things they did is they went to Red Tracton, and they just were trying to find out what happened. Red Tracton told them that the car that Tip was driving that day was actually a car that Red had given Tip to drive. Tip had done some legal work for him, and so Red gave him a car to help pay him off. He didn't give him the car. He just let him drive it. So the car that Tip was driving the day of the murders was actually a car that Red Tracton had given him. But what they were able to find out through Red, and then talking to some other associates, was that Tip had started going around to some people that he knew, some ex-cops who had kind of gone bad, a few other people, trying to find somebody that he could hire to do this, to kill Jenny and to wound him. They talked to this one former police officer that Tip had represented in a drug case 10 years earlier. Tip had tried hiring that guy to do it. This guy told him to, go to hell. He's not going to do that. Mm. And then he finally found somebody that was willing to do it. The reason that the case is still technically unsolved is that they never found the actual hitman who did it. Mike Thies, the detective, he told me, he said, we're never going to find out who did it. Whoever he ended up hiring to do it was a pro. This person, went back into the underworld, and we're never going to find out. So they know exactly who was behind the killings, but they don't know who actually did it. They know that Tip was, and this was written in the police report, that Tip was the one who was responsible for it. And the other piece of evidence that totally convinced them that this was the case is that the ammunition that was used in the murders was this really rare bullet. It was called Velez. It was this very lethal, very rare type of ammunition that hadn't been on the market in like 10 years. It was really popular in the early 1970s among the underworld. People would use that to, for mob hits and things like that. But it was a really rare ammunition, wasn't even made anymore. So the bullet that killed Jenny, the bullets that killed Jenny and the one that killed Tip, was this ammunition. They found in Tip's trunk a box of that ammunition. So what that told them was that Tip had gone there. He'd given the hitman. He said, he probably gave him the gun in the ammunition to use. So they had all the evidence that they needed to find out that, yeah, Tip Tip basically killed himself. He killed Jenny, and then the hitman did a little bit too good of a job and killed him as well.
The arrogance of Tip to have the bullets in his car, the arrogance of this man frustrates me. It's such a fascinating story. And what I think about, and I've read your book a couple of times now, and every time I read it, I think if that original journalist had put together that she was Jenny Maxwell and an Elvis girl, it would have been a much bigger story, and there would have been much more press on it, and your family and the Elvis fans and her own fans and the community would have known what had happened to her, and Tip wouldn't have got away with it for so long. If that original journalist had gone,
this would have been a huge Hollywood slang at this point, and they would have, reporter would have stayed on the story, like you said, and they would have, they would have called Mike Thies and said, "What, do you know what happened? Do you know what happened?" And then they would have,
the Elvis girl, exactly,
right. Instead, it took 40 years for the truth to come out.
So basically, I was listening to another interview that you've done, and you said solved but not solved, and I think that is the perfect description for it. It's solved but not, and it's just it's so heartbreaking because people think Hollywood is the golden, and once you're there, you're it. But you could be the biggest star like Elvis, or you could be Jenny Maxwell, who doesn't quite get to Elvis level but is famous. Everyone kind of has a heartbreaking story in Hollywood, and Jenny's just another casualty of Hollywood. And I think the whole thing's sad. Her whole life is so sad. But I think the saddest thing for me is what happened. The fact there's no justice, and the fact of what happened to Brian, her son, after it. But because of how Jenny passed away, Brian didn't get anything of hers. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that is a tragic part of it. So the way the law worked at that time was that Jenny and Tip didn't have a will that stipulated who would get what if both of them were to die. So the way the law worked at that time was that if one person died first, the other spouse would get everything, and then if that spouse died, then their children would get everything. So because Jenny died first, the second that Jenny died, and because Tip was still alive at that time, everything Jenny had, anything she was entitled to, all went to Tip. And then when Tip died 3.5 hours later, everything went to Tip's children. So because of that, Brian did not get anything. He told me the story. The thing he really wanted was this mini bike, this little motorcycle that he had that he used to ride. They had a lake house in this place called Idlewild in California. He used to ride his bike out there all the time, his motorcycle. He just wanted that, and he didn't get that. He didn't get anything. So Brian put his life back together after that, but the way it worked, there was nothing a lawyer could do, there was nothing anyone could do. That was just
heartbreaking. The fact that Tip's children wouldn't let him have something of his mother's. I hope that, as you said, Brian's found some sort of peace with his mother's memory, because it's just it's just such a sad story. But I'm so glad that you wrote this book, because if you hadn't, I probably just would have looked at the Wikipedia page and moved on and not looked into Jenny. And I'm so glad I know about her now, and I know about her talent, and I know who she was, and I get to share with my followers who she was. But you go so much more into this in the book, and I want you to tell people where they can find the book, because I really think it's a must read. It's a really, really great read. It's really easy to read. It's a really great read. So congratulations to you. Where can we find it?
I really appreciate that. So yeah, real quick, the way I wrote the book was, so I found all this out in 2019 and didn't know what I was going to do with any of it. I was a newspaper editor for a lot of years. I've been a writer my whole career, but I've never written a book before at all. Didn't know what I was going to do. So I actually wrote the book during COVID when the pandemic hit.
Yep.
It was sort of like a blessing in disguise in a weird way, but I had all this stuff in my head going, I don't know what I'm going to do with, this truth. I told my family, and I told some other people, but I didn't tell the world or Jenny's fans, what had happened. So yeah, during COVID, I just started writing the book. I said, I'm going to write one chapter a night. I couldn't do anything else. I love watching sports, watching athletics on TV. I couldn't do that. So every night I just wrote another chapter of the book and packed it out throughout 2020, and then eventually, so it got published, and so the book is called Murder of an Elvis Girl, and it's available on Amazon. It's the only place it's available, but you can either get the paperback or the Kindle version, or if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it that way as well. for free if you're already, subscribed to that. But yeah, the book is Murder of an Elvis Girl, and it's available on Amazon.
I cannot recommend it more. Everyone needs to go read it and learn more about Jenny. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for writing about Jenny and letting the world discover your third cousin. I never know how second cousin.
I think I looked it up. It's first cousin and one's removed.
I don't know how it works. I'm like, a cousin.
I just call her my mom's cousin. Yeah.
yeah, that's easiest. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, hopefully we can keep spreading the Jenny Maxwell story.
Oh, Cassie, thank you. Thank you so much. I love talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this heartbreaking story. If you'd like to learn more about Jenny's life and Buddy's investigation, I'll leave links to the book down below. If you're new here, please subscribe to Hollywoodland for more classic Hollywood history, Elvis Presley, forgotten stars, and the stories behind the movies that we love. I'll see you in the next one.